This video is sponsored by G2A. Use cashback code Darion for 3% off on Warcraft products. Hello guys, this is Darion's Movies, and today I'll be talking about Death Knights and how they're created, focusing on the actual creation process both in body and spirit. So without further ado, let's get into the lore. The first ever Death Knights were quite different than what we know them as today. During the Orcish invasion and the attack on the Kingdom of Stormwind, in order to replenish the numbers, Gul'dan had formed the first order of Death Knights. Utilizing corpses of slain human knights, he instilled the essence of the warlocks of the Shadow Council, turning them into powerful undead spellcasters. They were in turn put to use as very valuable soldiers of the Horde, with the most notable one being Teron Gorefiend. However, unlike the modern Death Knights, these were not elite warriors. Instead, they were generally physically weak necromancers with extraordinary intellect inside the body of a knight. So, instead of doing the fighting themselves and being these very powerful warriors, they favored to reanimate their enemies and turn them into mindless, undead minions. Almost all of these first generation Death Knights were destroyed during the First and the Second War, or were transformed into liches by Kil'jaeden later on. So how were the Death Knights that we know today first created? As the Lich King gained more and more influence in Northrend, he needed vessels that would spread his authority across Azeroth. In turn, he opted for new undead creations that would serve as Scourge's mightiest generals. The son of Arthas Menethil, the king of Lordaeron, Prince Arthas, a budding paladin, was a perfect target. By manipulating his arrogance and dedication to his people, Ner'zhul had lured him to Northrend, corrupted his soul with the runeblade Frostmourne, and then turned him into his greatest servant. Following that, Arthas would do everything the Lich King commanded, ultimately reaching the Frozen Throne, breaking it, and merging with Ner'zhul. Arthas was the first of these second generation of Death Knights, but he wasn't the only one, as many paladins would later be turned into these dark creations, some willingly searching for power and some by force. Now, as Arthas took control of the Frozen Throne, he would have to create his own champions, the third generation. These Death Knights were different than the previous ones. They weren't strictly warlocks or paladins or this chosen sect, but instead the Lich King would pick the strongest warriors of any class and would put them through a strict, very sophisticated vetting process. First, when raised, they would be examined to see if they retained any emotion, fear or memories, and then these unworthy initiates would be fed alive to ghouls or executed. This seems to depend on whether they wake up before it is time or not during their development. Once passing this, they would go through quite a dark process. Death Knights are inflicted with an addiction known as the eternal or endless hunger and would feel immense pain if they're not inflicting suffering and death, essentially very potent sadism. This mechanism works to serve the Lich King and his mission to defeat the living. After sating this initial hunger, they would duel other Death Knights to test their strength and are subsequently given a powerful runeblade. In most cases, Death Knights are very similar to their former selves, aside from pale skin and eye color. However, that isn't always the case, as sometimes they may resemble Forsaken more, as in undead progression, or even skeletons, as was the case with a few Death Knights in the past. Much like the other undead, they're capable of sleeping, which is not exactly necessary and is actually forbidden by the Scourge, with the case of Death Knights being executed because of it. In terms of food, they're known to eat primarily humanoid meat, vermin, and insects. Now, despite being elite warriors of the Lich King, only the select few champions are actually treated with a lot of privilege, as there were cases of Death Knights being executed for very minor reasons, turned into feral ghouls, or even stitched into abominations. Generally, the Death Knights that do very well are those that are determined and full of hate and vengeance, an example being Darion and Mograine, one of the most influential and powerful Death Knights that fell in the battle against the Scourge. Eventually, the majority would split apart from the Lich King and would regain their free will, although their mind would still be affected. Unlike many other undead with a lot of brain damage or that just get their bodies completely destroyed or replaced, generally the Death Knights would be able to act mostly in the same manner as they did before death, and on occasion even feel positive emotions. For example, Thassarian saved his own sister as a Death Knight and shared a close friendship with Koltira Deathweaver. On the other hand, there are Death Knights that almost completely turned dark. One extreme example of positive emotions was Sir Zeliek, that was incorruptible, and even though his body was forced to obey the scourge, he had managed to retain his sanity in undeath, meaning that he was forced to slay against his own will. He would ask for forgiveness when doing the bidding of the Lich King, and was ultimately defeated in extremis. Death Knights are one of the most elite units of the Scourge, and one of them actually turned into Lich King. Even though not as prominent now with Bolvar as they were in the past, they're still one of the most interesting entities in the Warcraft universe. Tragic characters, but powerful. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out how ghouls are created by clicking on the screen, and also check out the second channel, Doran's Academy on History and Science, as the link is in the description below. See you next time.